Apple Card is the perfect card for your holiday shopping. You can apply on your iPhone in minutes and start using it right away. You'll earn up to 3% daily cash back on every purchase, including products at Apple, like a new iPhone 16 or Apple Watch Ultra. Start holiday shopping for your friends and family today with Apple Card. Subject to credit approval. Apple Card issued by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Terms and more at applecard.com.
Welcome to Nada Yada Island.
We're back on the Nada Yada Island Confessions Show. Benny is about to tell us how he found two loves. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks to Metro, I found iPhone 12 and Apple Watch SE.
At Metro, get the perfect match of both iPhone 12 with 5G and Apple Watch SE for only $99.99. You heard that right. Both for just $99.99. Holidays with Nada Yada Yada. Only at Metro by T-Mobile.
Bring your number and ID, sign up for Metro Flex Plus, and add a watch line. Not available if you're with T-Mobile or been with Metro in the past 180 days. Limit 2 per account.
Hi. So a few years ago, we aired an episode about a hairstyle, the mullet. As you're about to hear, it's actually about way more than a hairstyle. It's about the mullet as a word, as a symbol, as a mystery, as something we collectively misremember. And in the 4 years since it first aired, some things have changed. Like, mainly, the mullet has gotten a lot cooler in the mainstream. And I think this episode does a pretty good job of explaining why. Other things haven't changed, though. And the mullet is still surprisingly a window into just how strongly we can believe exactly what we want to. I think it's one of our best episodes, a truly expansive, satisfying, and meaningful investigation into a do that won't die. I hope you enjoy.
This podcast contains explicit language.
Lauren Wright is a DJ, and for the last 3 years, she's had a very particular haircut. You know the one. Business in the front, party in the back.
I am the proud owner and wearer of a mullet.
So first, can you describe what your mullet looks like to me? What nature of mullet is it?
It's pretty short and tight on the sides, and I've got some solid length in the back. So it's kind of getting flowy. I think it's more the mullet that makes more people uncomfortable. So, it's a little less feminine. It's definitely curly and luscious, and I don't know. I'm pretty proud of it.
Lauren first encountered mullets when she was a kid, back in the 90s.
So I grew up in Texas, and I remember, I think the first mullet I ever saw in person was in elementary school. My PE teacher, who was a woman, she was the head coach. She had this long, epic, curly mullet, and she had a really thick country accent, and she was always chewing gum, gold hoops, just strong gay woman, which I didn't really know at the time. At least twice a week, she'd say, "Everybody line up," and we'd get on the line, and she would throw on Billy Ray Cyrus' "Achy Breaky Heart," and she'd teach us different line dances. So it was kind of this double mullet experience with, this strong woman with a mullet who everyone respects is having us line up and dance to this country star with another epic mullet.
These were the waning glory days of the mullet, a hairstyle that was once the it-do not only of country stars and lesbians, but of rock stars, hockey players, soccer players, TV characters, school-age boys across the country, and people all over the world. From such heights, the mullet could only fall. And it fell far. By the end of the 1990s, it had become dramatically uncool, loathed even, considered to be uniquely unattractive, trashy, and low class. You can see this in the 2001 comedy Joe Dirt, in which David Spade plays a sweet, beleaguered loser whose most distinctive quality is his incredible mullet. He's constantly teased about it, as by this radio shock jock, played by Dennis Miller.
Hey, Xander, you gotta see this guy.
God almighty, manna from inbred heaven. Hey, Freak Boy, 1976 called. It wants its hairstyle back.
This sentiment that the mullet is particularly classless, outmoded, and hideous is still the dominant one, which is exactly what the subcultures that have sporadically embraced the mullet over the last 2 decades, electro-punk kids, self-aware rednecks, high-end fashionistas, queer people, like about it, the way it thumbs its nose at mainstream respectability.
You know, the mullet has been deemed like traditionally very unattractive and ugly. And so, you know, as someone who doesn't necessarily fit into traditional norms of beauty, I identify very much so with this haircut. It feels very powerful.
The mullet is this potent, versatile cultural signifier that conveys more now, almost 50 years into its existence, than it did when it was totally ubiquitous. And you know what? That's not even the craziest thing about it.
Were you calling them mullets? Do you remember?
No, I don't think that I was. I feel like I was too young to kind of remember like the big 80s mullet style.
What if I told you that the word mullet didn't exist until 1994?
It would be surprising for sure, because I would think maybe in the 70s, like leading into the 80s. But are you just saying that we didn't have a word for it? It just was existing out here with no label?
This is Decodering, a show about cracking cultural mysteries. I'm Willa Paskin. You may think the mullet is just an unfortunate haircut, but let me tell you, it is so much more than that. And in this episode, we're going to prove it, not just by following the story of the mullet as a hairstyle, but by following the story of the word mullet, to figure out how a name helped transform an omnipresent do into a national joke and altered our cultural memory in the process. So today, on Decodering, what I swear turns out to be a tonsorial mystery, an aesthetic mystery, a lexical mystery, a chronological mystery, and maybe even an existential mystery. Who named the mullet? This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you can save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states. This episode is brought to you by Saks.com. There's joy in finding the perfect gift for the ones you love, but it can be a challenge. Saks.com's holiday gift guide makes it easy. Whether you're surprising your hard-to-shop-for sister with a Chloe bracelet bag or gifting your partner a memorable scent from Gucci, at Saks.com there's holiday inspiration for every personality on your list. Saks.com does make it really easy to find inspiration. I was just on their site, and like they say, it is organized like a gift guide. They have all sorts of fun categories like cozy weekend vibes and weekend uniforms and kids pick that curate whole looks for you or your loved ones. Saks.com's hand-picked guide can help take the stress out of the holidays. Add instant cheer to your home with some bright decor, or bundle up in a scarf coat from Totem to stay warm all season long. Find gifts guaranteed to bring joy to everyone this holiday season at Saks.com. That's Saks.com for the ultimate holiday gift guide and all the shopping inspiration you need. I want to start at the beginning, not of the mullet, but of my interest in the mullet, which was sparked by an email from a listener with the subject line, "The Mystery of the Mullet."
My name is Oskar Sigvardsson. I'm a software developer and I live in Stockholm.
Oskar is really interested in language and linguistics.
So I subscribe to all these like weird linguistics and lexicography blogs and things like that. And one of the blogs I am subscribed to is the Oxford English Dictionary's Public Appeals blog, where the Oxford English Dictionary puts out appeals to the public for oh, we're researching this word and we've hit a wall. And so in 2013, they put out this blog post about the word mullet.
In this public appeal, the Oxford English Dictionary, the OED, said they couldn't find a documented reference to the mullet as a hairstyle prior to 1994.
Which I was very surprised to read, because 1994, that's so late. Mullets are the most 80s thing you can imagine. There's nothing more emblematic of the 80s than a mullet. But you're telling, but nobody used that word in the entire decade? Nobody, it can't be, it's so weird.
And it is so weird. In the popular imagination, mullets are as 80s as shoulder pads, Dynasty, Ronald Reagan, junk bonds, and breakdancing. The two are totally intertwined. And to explain why, I have to go back to the other beginning, the beginning of the mullet itself. Despite its connection to the 1980s, the modern mullet was not actually birthed in that decade. It was first popularized in the early 1970s by David Bowie.
Ziggy played guitar, jamming good with Weird and Gilly.
In her memoir, Backstage Passes, Angie Bowie, Bowie's wife at the time, recalls that while David was working on his album, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, for which he would inhabit the character of Ziggy Stardust, an omnisexual glam space alien, he woke up one morning wanting a new haircut. It was Christmas week, and the hairstylist who regularly did Bowie's mom's hair paid a house call. This stylist, Susie Ronson, née Fussy, told the story of what happened next as a storyteller at the Moth.
David and Angie were sitting by a large bay window, and they were discussing the merits of cutting his hair short. He had this long, blonde, wavy hair at the time. They asked me my opinion. I said, well, no one else has got short hair. Nobody. You'd look really different.
Bowie showed Susie a magazine photo of a Kansai Yamamoto model. Kansai Yamamoto was a Japanese designer, one of the first to show his work in London, who would in the next few years begin a long creative collaboration with Bowie.
Can you do that? Well, as I'm saying yes, I'm thinking to myself, it's a woman's hairstyle. And how am I going to actually do that?
The answer was some scissors, Schwarzkopf red hot hair dye, and Guard, an anti-dandruff treatment that made Bowie's hair stand up in the front. When Susie was done, Bowie had the famous Ziggy haircut, bright red, long and flipped out at the back, and short and bristling in the front. It was the perfect haircut for the extraterrestrial Ziggy, who was not exactly male or female, because the mullet was genderless too. It's easy to lose sight of this now that the mullet has become so associated with a performative, aggressive machismo. But it's a haircut that's long and short, male and female, both and neither at the same time. The fact that it's not entirely straight, also in the sense of not being square, is what makes it cool. But as the mullet became more and more popular, its essential androgyny faded into the background. And that's because the people carrying water for the mullet in the 70s and early 80s weren't just mullet-having performers like Joan Jett, Paul McCartney, Bono, and Prince. They were hockey players. To illustrate how the mullet crossed over from rock stars to athletes and regular people, getting bigger all the while, I want to highlight two figures in particular. The first is the hockey player Ron Duguay.
Ron Duguay awarded a penalty shot, and here he comes.
Duguay, a handsome Canadian who was married to a model, played in the NHL from 1979 to 1989 and is widely credited with having one of the earliest mullets in the league. You can see it in a 1979 commercial he appeared in with three of his teammates for Vidal Sassoon jeans. In this ad, the four players strut around the ice in jerseys and dungarees. Of the four, Duguay is the only one to have a mullet, but it's relatively understated. His sandy, curly hair is definitely longer in the back, but not wildly so. It looks windswept and kind of sophisticated. It's a casually cool haircut. I mean, even Vidal Sassoon thought so. No wonder kids across the country wanted one. As the hairstyle caught on with the public, so did ad hoc names for it.
We didn't call it mullets, we called it hockey hair.
John Warner is a writer and market researcher who grew up in the Chicago suburbs. He was in high school in the mid to late 1980s, and he played on the hockey team. Just about every member of his team, himself included, had hockey hair, though they called it something more specific.
We called it the Duguay, named after Ron Duguay, because he had such a good flow.
You called it flow?
It was called the flow, like, how's your flow? If somebody came in, it was looking like long and good, flapping behind the helmet, you say, oh, good flow. It was just like, it was what you did. Guys permed it. I mean, they got perms of only their flow. Guys like walking into the locker room for practice after the perm, and you could smell it. You didn't make fun of them. It was like, oh, that's cool. You know, he permed it.
As you can tell from the perms, as the 80s wore on, the mullet was getting increasingly elaborate. By the end of the decade, it was huge, as a trend, but also just physically huge. Please see Jaromir Jagr.
I came here in 1990 when I had the longest hair in NHL, but don't forget, people, in 1990 there was a style.
That's Jagr, the legendary Czech who would play in the NHL for 28 seasons, talking to ESPN in 2016. When he first came into the league as an apple-cheeked 18-year-old, he had an Eastern European statement mullet, this mop of dark chestnut hair that cascaded down his back in a curly bouffant. It's like the mullet a prince in a Disney movie would have if they had mullets. Well-conditioned, luxurious, somehow sparkly. And Jagr's hairstyle, which he kept for his first 9 seasons in the league, wasn't the only one of its kind, though it may be best in class.
I came to US, first city I'll buy, there was Motley Crue and Def Leppard and Bon Jovi, so they all had a long hair, so I want to be a rock star like them.
It wasn't just the hair metal bands rocking audacious mullets. This is the time of Andre Agassi, Lionel Richie, Michael Bolton. And one thing I want to underscore is that these attention-grabbing mullets didn't just end with the 1980s. So many of the canonical mullets, Jagr's, Billy Ray Cyrus's, Jean-Claude Van Damme's, are not 80s mullets at all. They're 1990s mullets. When it comes to mullets, we're suffering from a kind of distortion, one familiar from the TV show Mad Men. That series begins in the early 1960s, which looks so much more like the 1950s than what we think of as the 60s. The aesthetics we assign to decades often start mid-decade and then run into the next one. But we tend to erase this decade straddling in favor of a simpler shorthand. But this simplification can actually change how we think about the past, and the mullet is an example of this. The enormous mullet belongs as much to the early 90s, to Lauren Wright's line dancing gym class, as the late 80s, even though we don't remember it that way. This brings us back to Oskar Sigvardsson, the Swede who had been floored to hear the term mullet might not exist until 1994, which is especially late if you are under the mistaken impression that mullets more or less died out in 1989. Confronted with a claim that seemed so chronologically off, Oskar did what a curious, language-obsessed person might do. He tried to find out for himself. AI is storming every industry, and literally billions of dollars are being invested. The problem is that AI needs a lot of speed and processing power. So how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/decoder. That's oracle.com/decoder. oracle.com/decoder. This episode is brought to you by public.com. Did you know you can lock in a 6% or higher yield with a bond account at public.com? The Federal Reserve recently announced rate cuts, and there could be more rate cuts this year and in 2025 as well. That's good news if you're looking to buy a home, but it might not be so good for the interest you earn on your cash. So if you want to lock in a 6% or higher yield with a diversified portfolio of high yield and investment grade bonds, check out public.com. It only takes a couple of minutes to sign up. And once you lock in your yield, you can earn regular interest payments even as rates decline. Lock in a 6% or higher yield with a bond account at public.com/decoder. But remember, your yield is not locked in until you invest. Brought to you by Public Investing, member FINRA and SIPC. As of September 26th, 2024, the average annualized yield to worst across the bond account is greater than 6%. Yield to worst is not guaranteed, not an investment recommendation. All investing involves risk. Visit public.com/disclosures/bond-account for more info. Okay, so from here on out, we're going to dig into the lexical weeds, but I promise the payoff is worth it. So the Oxford English Dictionary had asked the public for help in finding any reference to the mullet as a hairstyle from before 1994, and Oskar set out to find one.
Once or twice in the past, I've been able to, find something earlier than the Oxford English Dictionary says it was printed or something. So I started doing that, right? I started just putting in mullet in Google Books and just saying, okay, between 1980 and 1989, find me all usages of the word. And, it's just fish, right? It's all fish.
The mullet, a family of fish, is eaten all over the world.
And it was I did it for hours trying to find it. And, once in a while you can find reference to the insult, like mullet head. Paul Newman is called mullet head in Cool Hand Blue. He doesn't have a mullet. He's being called an idiot. There's a clip from Cheers where Sam calls Diana mullet head.
You just ended that sentence with 2 prepositions.
Don't you have customers to deal with?
That ended with a preposition too.
Don't you have customers to deal with, mullet head?
So that's it, right? You can't actually find it. At that point, it became oh, this is a fun fact I'll use at parties. Less efficient to use in Sweden, though.
It's not that efficient in Sweden, because in Sweden, as in many of the countries where it was a phenomenon, this hairstyle is not called a mullet.
The Swedish word for it is hockeyfrilla, which means hockey hair.
Hockeyfrilla is a whole thing in Sweden. There's even a well-known 1993 Swedish rock song about it.
There was a very big hit from the Swedish group The Lyckliga Kompisarna, which translates as The Happy Friends. It was huge. It was something that everyone knew because it's a real earworm and it's funny, and it has the chorus is just a guy singing ho 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 hockeyfrilla, ho 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 hockeyfrilla.
Anyway, even though it wasn't always a smash with other Swedes, Oskar often shared this mullet factoid. And then in 2015, for no particular reason, he decided to share it on Reddit. Oskar posted his information about mullet to the Today I Learned subreddit, a kind of gathering place for fun tidbits.
So I've never had anything on Reddit blow up, but that thing blew up. It was on the front page of Reddit for almost an entire day. It was the most fun 24 hours I've ever had on the internet.
Just because everyone whoa, and then trying to solve this problem with you, that.
Yeah, exactly. That was my favorite part, right? Because the comments, many comments were this is total horseshit. I was in the 80s. You used mullet all the time.
This is exactly what some of the comments on his post sound like. Bullshit. I grew up in Queens, New York City, and used the term mullet since way before 1994, one reads. Another goes, I call bullshit. When Achy Breaky Heart came out in 1992, I and everyone I knew in North Dakota was referring to his haircut as a mullet.
There was lots of those. But anyway, lots of people started doing the research, and it was so much fun.
Even with all these people digging around, though, no one could turn up an earlier reference. But then Oskar's post got cross-posted to an Australian subreddit, where it was framed as get a load of this nonsense. And one of the people reading that post, he found something.
A user named Topsmate, posted a comment, yeah, that Today I Learned is full of shit and a perfect example of groupthink. Took me under an hour of browsing through my Street Machine collection to find this reference to a mullet as a hairstyle from 1991. And and he posted this image of a magazine that he found in his garage.
The image that Topsmate posted is of 2 pages from an Australian hot rod magazine called Street Machine. They're from a piece about a teenager named Craig Parker, who built his own muscle car. The story includes a picture of him sitting on the ground, his back against the grille of a red sports car, in which he has an unmistakable mullet. And then there's an arrow added by Topsmate pointing to this picture, and another arrow pointing to a line in the text of the piece that reads, 3 years ago, Craig Parker was a mullet-haired teenager who wanted to build a car that could rival the best. It seemed to be a piece calling a mullet in 1991.
I remember reading that and like my jaw dropped. Like, that was the coolest thing I've ever seen.
Oskar immediately replied to Topsmate's comment and said, "This is amazing. You should submit this to the OED. This is great work."
Part of me was like dismissed that my cool theory I learned had been disproven by this Australia guy, but the bigger part was so happy that I could like make the I had like a small part in making the contribution to the history of this term.
Now, if you're saying to yourself, 1991, that's still so late. That's not even the 1980s. Is this really that big a contribution to the history of the term? Please keep this in mind about slang. Often it's used in spoken language years before it ends up in the documentary record. So in 1991 usage, maybe that does mean the mullet goes back to the late 1980s. And also, this was such a big deal to Oskar because he was just way down the rabbit hole.
I had totally internalized this fact, right? Like, I had done the research and I had like lived with this for 2 years, and I had like just spent hours defending this thesis in the comments. And then this guy comes and like, no, yeah, I just went out to my garage and found the Holy Grail, with like essentially what I think of as any pre-1994 references to mullets.
Oskar wasn't the only one who would feel this way about the Street Machine article. The Oxford English Dictionary was about to jump back into the picture. So the OED had been on the mullet case way before Oskar.
The OED, the Oxford English Dictionary, it covers the whole 1,000-year history of English.
Katherine Connor-Martin is the head of product for Oxford Languages, the dictionary division of Oxford University Press, which publishes the OED, and where she began working in 2003 as an editor working on the dictionary.
And for every word in the OED, we give the first known documentary evidence for its use, not just for the word overall, but for every single meaning that the word has.
In 2001, the dictionary added the word mullet, or specifically mullet noun 9.
It's mullet noun 9 because there are 8 earlier words called mullet in English, each of which has a different etymological origin.
But the people at the OED weren't totally satisfied with the etymological portion of the mullet noun 9 entry, because like everybody else, 1994 sounded late to them.
There seemed to be a disconnect between the lexical history of mullet and the cultural and social history of the mullet. And furthermore, we had anecdotal evidence from people who were sure that they had heard or used that term in the 1980s. And as an editor, I myself felt like, well, obviously we knew this term in the 1980s. So in 2013, we decided to launch what we call an appeal to the public for further information on this word.
The OED has been launching these appeals since it was founded, and now they do that on the internet, hoping that people like Oskar will find something they couldn't. For a few years, though, no one found anything. And then they got a lead.
Then in 2015, the plot thickened because someone posted a TIL Thing I Learned thread on Reddit.
The OED people don't know Oskar, but Katherine is talking about Oskar. Someone on staff had come across his post, which had been updated with a link to the Street Machine article.
That was really exciting, and when we found out about it, we were thrilled. But the OED's policy, because these first dates are so important to us, we really have to verify them. And we typically we want to verify them in print in a library, which is the gold standard.
So the OED reached out to a number of Australian libraries, and the librarian at the National Library of Australia found a copy of Street Machine from January 1992, which would have come out in late 1991. Katherine read me the email the librarian sent to her.
They said, "I've checked our copy of Street Machine from January, February 1992. On page 31, there is some wording that is very similar to the quote you provided, but it doesn't mention the word mullet.
Nothing if not persistent, the OED asked several other Australian librarians to track down this article. None of them could find a version of it with the word mullet, but they also couldn't find a January 1992 issue of Street Machine. They could only find a January-February 1992 double issue, which instead of making the whole thing shadier, actually introduced some doubt.
Research librarians are the greatest people, and so one of them took it upon themselves to contact the editors of Street Machine magazine themselves. And they also didn't know of a January 1992 issue, but they couldn't say for certain that there might not have been some kind of special early version with limited circulation for a special event that might have had a slightly different text.
Street Machine ended up posting about all of this on their Facebook page, and none of their readers could find this mention of the mullet or this January 1992 issue either. All of this sounds pretty sketchy, and that's why it didn't go into the OED. It was not definitive documentary proof. But for all that Katherine was suspicious of it, it still niggled at her. She couldn't completely dismiss it. And that's because she knows too much about how language works.
Australian English has a history of kind of punching above its weight when it comes to colloquial English. So, for example, the word selfie originated in Australian English and then infiltrated the rest of the world. It's entirely plausible that this word originated in Australian slang in the late 1980s and early 1990s, like all of these Australians say it did, and that it was only popularized by the Beastie Boys rather than coined by them. Like, that wouldn't be surprising at all.
So yeah, the first documented usage of mullet noun 9 from 1994. It doesn't come from some random Usenet page. It comes from the Beastie Boys. The Beastie Boys, the rap rock outfit consisting of Adam Adrock Horovitz, Mike D. Diamond, and Adam MCA Yauk, who died in 2012, released the song Mullet Head in June 1994. The lyrics, which reference late-stage mullet sporter Jean-Claude Van Damme, Billy Ray Cyrus, Kenny G, and Joey Buttafuoco, get at the idea, still with us, of the mullet haver as a particular kind of macho sleazebag. They skewer and condescend to a stereotype of lower-class bridge and tunnel guys, douches with stonewashed jeans and mullets driving into New York City to start fights and hook up with underage girls. The song also includes the lines, "You want to know what's a mullet? Well, I got a little story to tell about a hairstyle that's a way of life. Have you ever seen a mullet wife?" These words are in the OED. The second documented reference to the mullet, included in the OED2, also comes from the Beastie Boys. It arrived in 1995 in their storied, short-lived magazine Grand Royal, which was a big enough deal at the time to be featured on MTV News with Kurt Loder.
The trio has now come out with its own magazine, and it turns out to be one of the funniest reads around. Grand Royal is, as its proprietors acknowledge, a celebration of inside humor, basketball trivia, slang, blatant opinions, and half-baked notions.
The second issue delivered on the slang. It contains a collection of articles gathered under the headline, Mulling Over the Mullet. Its opening essay begins, "There's nothing as bad as a bad haircut, and perhaps the worst haircut of all is a cut we call the mullet." It goes on to include a series of mini-essays about the haircut's origins and cultural significance, focusing largely on the cheesy white guy mullet, though it has one section called The Political Correctness of the Mullet, which notes its popularity among Blacks, Hispanics, Indigenous people, and women. There's also a Q&A with a mullet head, a defense of the mullet, and synonyms for the hairstyle, including soccer rocker, bi-level, neck warmer, ape drape, mud flap, hack job, the Missouri Compromise, and the Kentucky Waterfall, only some of which were jokes. Warren Fahy is a novelist, but in the 90s he was freelance writing and running a movie database in San Diego. He'd gone to high school with Grand Royal's editor, who got in touch about the project, or as Warren tells it, about the mission.
Everyone from porn stars to Superman were sporting it suddenly, and masterstroke was to tag it with a word that would, forever hopefully abolish it from the human race.
The editor asked Warren to write an ancient history of the mullet, a kind of anthropological satire. Warren agreed, even though no one knew what a mullet was.
At the time, it was utterly, completely new and nobody had heard of it. And everybody thought it was nuts to do it. What are you naming a hairstyle after a fish? What?
For the piece, he went up to Los Angeles to get a leather-bound tome that he says had been permanently borrowed from the LA County library system about the history of hairstyles going back to the Sumerians.
I drove up to the Beastie Boys office. They had like a half-court basketball court in their office. While I was there, Mike D actually came in. He had just gotten a wig on Hollywood Boulevard and went to a barber shop and got it cut into a mullet. The barber was really upset about it. But he then drove around Hollywood Boulevard in a convertible, and they did a photo shoot for the magazine with him wearing it.
These photos would appear in a piece called I Was a 20-something Mullet Head for a Day by Mike Diamond, a chronological account of Mike D and the director Spike Jonze' day in mullet wigs. With this piece and all the rest, the Beasties were tapping into and crystallizing an already popular sentiment that this hairdo was over. If it had once been rebellious, it was increasingly conformist. If it had once been a way to signal you were an outsider, now it was just a way to pose as one. Yes, it was still common, but it wasn't cool. Tangentially, I think this may help explain one of the odder coincidences of all this, which is that in a period of 2 years, there were as many songs about this one hairstyle. Please recall that Swedish hockey hair song from 1993. In 1993 and 1994, hockey hair was in a deeply transitional moment where it was popular and yet also played out, making it curious, of note in a way it hadn't been for years. And these songs, they noticed. Anyway, getting back on track, if the Beasties didn't originate the disdain for the mullet, they mainstreamed it and its new insulting name. But that doesn't mean they came up with this name. As Katherine Connor Martin said, it's totally plausible that the term mullet came from somewhere else, likely in the slang of some subculture, somewhere on the English-speaking globe. So now I want to turn back to the only subculture that had showed any promise, however piddling. I want to turn back to that lead we left dangling somewhere over Australia. I want to turn back to the elusive 1991 Street Machine. As far as we could tell, the only stone the OED had left unturned was Topsmate himself, the Reddit user who had originally posted the Street Machine pages. So we decided to reach out to him. We didn't expect him to respond, but we figured it was worth a try. While we were waiting for him to get back to us, Benjamin Frisch, the producer of Decoding, started digging around. First, he tried to find other places online Topsmate hung out, but his only lead were the images that Topsmate had posted on Reddit. Those images were all collected on the popular image hosting site called Imgur, or Imager, depending on how you want to pronounce it, which allows you to click through everything someone has uploaded. Ben started clicking through Topsmate's other Imager posts, looking for something that might give him another username or an email address. And then he noticed that one post had been uploaded 3 years after the original Reddit post. According to Imager, it has only been viewed about 300 times, and as far as we can tell, it has never been linked anywhere. Not on Reddit, not on Twitter. Oskar had never seen it. Katherine had never seen it. It had never popped up in any of the research we did for this piece. The name of the post is An Apology to the Oxford English Dictionary.
Okay, so hi. Hi. So
I called Katherine back to tell her about it.
Can I just read it to you?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's from April 22nd, 2018, and it's called An Apology to the Oxford English Dictionary. What? And it says, a few years ago, I saw a post on Reddit about the origin of the word mullet. I photoshopped a 1992 magazine I had laying around to make it look like it referred to the term mullet before it was first used in print. I changed the cover to make it more difficult to trace as an issue in the archives and add more credence to my edits. I also edited the publication copyright date to 1991, so it may have appeared as a special early edition. What? It says, why would I do this? I was a founding member of an online community called Annoy Club, which looks for arguments on the internet and then creates fake proofs as evidence that the person who is correct in the thread is actually wrong. We pick arguments that we have no personal stake in and involve no people we know. And for points, we create images, photos, websites, and interviews with false information supporting the incorrect side. Why am I admitting to this? I recently came across an entry in the OED's own blog, and there was a lot of work by OED staff behind the scenes trying to hunt down the special issue of the magazine I photoshopped. Also dragged into it were Stream Machine magazine staff and staff in multiple libraries in Australia. I think they should know I'm sorry for what I have done. I respect the OED, and I should not have published the edits that I did.
Well, I have very mixed emotions to hearing this. I mean, first of all, there's like validation that this always felt sort of hinky, and the likelihood of it being real seemed vanishingly small. And I have to respect the game here, because those things that he mentions, like changing the copyright so it would be harder, like those were exactly the right things to do to keep that tiny shred of possibility alive that this was real. And it worked. But then also it's kind of sad when a mystery ends.
Katherine also pointed out another thing, that the whole thing is pretty dark. There's an additional paragraph in the apology in which Topsmate says he's become disillusioned with Annoy Club because it's, quote, full of people whose only purpose in life is trolling vaccination supporters and U.S. political discussions. He goes on to say he almost died in the 80s from an infection for which there is now a vaccine, and he thinks that the political work is just empowering those who would prefer a confused populace. I want no part of the community anymore. Between 2015, when he posted the photoshopped image, and 2018, when he apologized, Topsmate, like so many people, seems to have been confronted with what it means to live in a post-truth world, one he was actively contributing to, only to find out he didn't like it that much. Still, he only saw fit to apologize in a hard-to-find image gallery that the people he was apologizing to might never have found. Is it really an apology if you don't deliver it? Still, Katherine's happy to have the whole thing resolved.
So we posted this appeal. We wondered about this question. Does the word mullet go back as far as our brains think it does, or only as far as the documented evidence shows? And I guess from our perspective, that's still not answered, but we're always open for new data.
At this point, I'm just like, you are open to new data, but like, I just feel like you guys got it.
We never say never in this business. There are always new things that come up. But yes, I don't think this is active anymore.
I want to gently suggest that there was something going on to keep it active for so long, something besides lexicographical plausibility. Call it a bit of mullet confirmation bias. Because it feels so much like the term ought to have existed before 1994, the OED put out this appeal. And then when evidence of it existing before 1994 popped up, it was taken seriously, really seriously. And then ultimately, perhaps more seriously than it deserved. Like multiple librarians more seriously than it deserved. And so many people in this tale behaved this way. Reddit readers, librarians, Street Machine editors and readers. Definitely me. We all kept digging because we couldn't quite believe that what we thought we knew was true wasn't true. One thing I noticed is that many of the people most devoted to the idea that the term mullet existed in the 1980s, Katherine, Oskar, Reddit commenters, me again, weren't even fully sentient in the 1980s. It wasn't personal experience or individual memory that was driving our certainty. It was just a cliched sense of the era, which was all we had to go on. In this regard, the mullet is a fun, low-stakes iteration of something that is often not fun or low stakes at all. People's warped but strongly held perceptions of the imagined past and the lengths they will go to hold on to them. Apple Card is the perfect card for your holiday shopping. You can apply on your iPhone in minutes and start using it right away. You'll earn up to 3% daily cash back on every purchase, including products at Apple, like a new iPhone 16 or Apple Watch Ultra. Start holiday shopping for your friends and family today with Apple Card. Subject to credit approval. Apple Card issued by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Terms and more at applecard.com. You know when you discover a new binge-worthy show or a song that you play on repeat and you have to share with your friends? That's what it feels like when you discover that Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan. Slate's president, Charlie Kammerer, is using Mint Mobile, and he thinks the Mint Mobile deal is amazing. He's on the $15 a month deal and is getting unlimited talk and text over their 5G network at literally a fraction of what he was paying with someone else. They let him use his existing phone, and he didn't even have to change his phone number. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/decoderring. That's mintmobile.com/decoderring. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/decoderring. $45 upfront payment required, which is equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. So we've almost fully excavated the mullet, but there's a little more to this mystery. If the term mullet wasn't coined in Australian car culture, who actually coined it? Did the Beastie Boys pluck it out of thin air, or did they get it from somewhere else? Honestly, seems like they plucked it.
It was definitely coined by Mike D of the Beastie Boys.
Warren Fahy, the writer who contributed to the Grand Royal mullet package again.
Who had noticed that this hairstyle was impinging on civilization to a monstrous degree at that point in time. And he came up with the word mullet and said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to devote an issue to making that word stick. So it was all quite intentional and completely planned by super genius Mike D.
Now, obviously, I would have liked to ask Mike D about this. Still would if anyone has an in. Please consider this my public appeal. But he declined to speak with us. But Warren is adamant Mike D coined the term, and the Grand Royal piece itself suggests everyone working on it at the time thought so too. The article says, we're not sure where the term mullet came from, but as usual, Mike D was the first to use it around here. If that implies he might have gotten it from somewhere else, the possibilities listed for where he might have gotten it, maybe he was thinking of a muskrat, for example, don't suggest he was borrowing slang from a buddy. Still, Mike was the Beastie most involved with the magazine. Maybe the staff just hadn't talked mullets with the other members. When I ran the theory that Mike D had coined the term by the Beastie Boys publicist, a man named Steve Martin, who has known them forever and did the real-life interview with a mullet head for the Grand Royal mullet package, he'd never heard that it came specifically from Mike D. Steve said he first heard the term from Adam Yauch, likely in the early planning stages for this piece. He asked him if it had anything to do with a fish, and Adam said, no. Whatever Beastie came up with it, the timeline supports the theory that one of them birthed it outright. I explained this all to Katherine.
This is just fully like too much detail, but one of the things that is also interesting is that song, Mullet Head. Like, it was a deep B-side. Like, it was originally released in 1994 in June as like an additional track on the single for the third single off Ill Communication, which is to say it's not an album track, but it actually also makes more sense of the Grand Royal piece because it's like this song came out in mid 1994, but it would have like only been for Beastie Boy heads or people who'd bought that single.
That's such an important part of slang too. So like the appeal of slang when it comes out is that it's an indicator of in-group identification. So like the exclusivity is what makes it tantalizing.
The other thing that is sort of interesting about just date-wise is that Grand Royal, so the issue that has this article about the mullet, which is so much more detailed than the song, is a year late. So it came out in 1995, but it's like famously a year late.
Oh, like the publication process was way longer than it was supposed to be.
Yes. And so that actually means it probably had been originally conceived in time to come out with the album, which came out in mid-1994. But then,
oh my God, you're tying this up to make it so like seeming like very straightforward. Well done. You solved the mullet mystery.
Well, you had already solved it. That's the joke. It was already solved.
Yes, it wasn't a mystery at all.
We just thought it was. It was a made-up mystery. It wasn't a mystery ever.
Please bear with me while I suggest there is a real mystery left. That's answer also has to do with the Beastie Boys. And it's, why do we think the mullet is so hideous? Because we do. I want to go back to something that Lauren Wright, the woman with the mullet who I spoke with at the top of the show, said.
You know, the mullet has been deemed like traditionally very unattractive and ugly.
But for decades, as we have seen, the mullet was not thought to be unattractive and ugly at all. What happened? I think part of the answer is the term itself. When the Beasties were clowning on it, the mullet was reaching the end of its natural life cycle. So everywhere, so mass, that hip urbanites like the Beasties were sneering at it. But that's not unique. This fate awaits most trends. Most styles seem unstylish as they're falling out of style. But that's not when most of them get their names. We don't call bell-bottoms pizza pants. But this is exactly what happened to the mullet. Is it crazy to think that matters? If the Beastie Boys hadn't named the mullet, doesn't it seem entirely possible that we wouldn't remember it so clearly? Some random hairdo with no agreed upon name. And if the name changed that we see it, and when we see it, couldn't it also have changed how we see it? Maybe one of the ways this term retrofitted the past is to make us primarily associate this hairstyle with the objects of the Beasties' ire, cheesy white guys still rocking it in 1994, and not think of it as what it had been for years, a surprisingly pan-gender, pan-racial, global haircut that had a really good run, but whose time was just up. The mullet, the term, blotted out the mullet, the hairstyle, which despite everything meant and continues to mean many different things to different groups of people. What I'm saying is, maybe the solution to this last mystery, why is the mullet so ugly, is that it isn't really at all.
For the people that really get it and appreciate it, it's a powerful thing to have.
This is Decoding. I'm Willa Paskin. If you have any cultural mysteries you want us to decode, please email us at decodering@slate.com. This episode was written by me. It was edited and produced by Benjamin Frisch. Decoding is produced by me, Evan Chung, Max Friedman, and Katie Shepard. Derek John is executive producer. Merritt Jacob is senior technical director. Thanks to Barney Hoskins, Jerry Slater, Daniel L. Schachter, Alicia Montgomery, June Thomas, Forrest Wickman, and everyone else who gave us help and feedback along the way. If you aren't already a Slate Plus member, I want to strongly encourage you to become one. You can subscribe now on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of the Decoding show page. Or you can visit slate.com/Decoder Plus to get access wherever you listen. We're going to be releasing bonus episodes regularly, including answers to mailbag questions, so please sign up now. Slate Plus members also get to listen to our show and every other Slate podcast without any ads, and you'll get unlimited access to Slate's website. Again, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free or visit slate.com/Decoder Plus to sign up. We'll see you in 2 weeks.